He is one of the best scorers in the history of basketball.
Lane back to Wilkins. Spinning jab, and he gets to it.
One of the few players who could go bucket for bucket with prime Michael Jordan. One of the first true unicorns in NBA history. The player with the craziest miraculous recovery in sports medicine up to that point. And yet, most fans forget the Hall of Famer when they list the all-time greats. Dominique Wilkins did it all on the NBA courts. He led the league in scoring at just 26 years old and with only 4 years of NBA experience.
Feeling they like their fans here. When we come back, a look at one of this game's most unique players, the incomparable Dominique Wilkins, as At the Half rolls on from the summit after this word from your local station.
At a time when, by the way, many people considered him a better player than Michael Jordan. He also beat MJ in one of the most iconic dunk contests in history, only to be robbed in the rematch in the opinion of many. But that's not all. Neek embraced the Atlanta Hawks and became the best player to ever suit up for the franchise.
And the excitement in Atlanta these days centers around the player who's perhaps chiefly responsible, Dominique Wilkins, the guy they call the human highlight film.
He has a resume that includes 9 All-Star selections, 7 All-NBA team selections, and scored over 23,000 points in his NBA career. So, how good was Dominique Wilkins? Actually, to answer that question, we have to start at the beginning. Dominique Wilkins' early years were not like those of other NBA players at the time. His father, John Wilkins, was not a former player, nor was he a former coach. He wasn't an athlete either. In fact, his profession had nothing to do with sports. He was a sergeant in the United States Air Force that happened to be stationed in France in January 1960. On the 12th, when Gertrude Baker gave birth to a baby boy they named Dominique, a future NBA superstar was born on French soil. It's not that Neek grew up in Europe for a large part of his childhood, as was the case with players such as Kobe Bryant. When he was just 2 years old, the Wilkins family embarked on the journey back to the United States. And between Dallas, Baltimore, and North Carolina, little Dominique grew up, always with a basketball in his hands. In fact, before the forward became known nationally, he first made a name for himself in his hometown. At Washington High School in North Carolina, he took his first steps in elite organized basketball, competing against some of the best programs in the state. And you could say he wasn't a late bloomer. As soon as he got to the team, the hardwood became his domain, because he became almost immediately one of the best players in state history. Wilkins won back-to-back high school MVPs in 1978 and 1979. Not only that, but he carried his team to back-to-back state championships. His hype and stock began to skyrocket, making him one of the most sought-after players for NCAA scouts. And it was no wonder. He appeared in the Faces in the Crowd section of Sports Illustrated thanks to an unprecedented performance. In a high school game, Dominique scored 48 points, had 27 rebounds, 9 dunks, and 8 blocks, showcasing his unreal athleticism. Shortly thereafter, at the McDonald's All-American, he put on a performance of 16 points and 12 rebounds against the rest of the nation's elite prospects. Yeah, that's why his stock skyrocketed before he made his Division I debut. Any high school player in North Carolina at that time would have chosen one of these 3 options: UNC, Duke, or NC State. In an alternate universe, he could have played with Michael Jordan in college. But Dominique's decision surprised everyone, because despite being highly sought after, he chose the University of Georgia, a team that, although less talented, would allow him to stand out more as a star. Of course, the decision caused him problems, because in a society where racism was still prevalent, he had to watch as some extremists burned a cross in his front yard. He was only 18 years old, but Dominique, as always, responded in the way he knew best, with basketball. Wilkins was already known at that point as the human highlight film, but that name didn't do justice to his talent, because in addition to making the most spectacular plays, Dominique was one of the best players in the entire NCAA since his freshman year. In his sophomore year, he averaged 24 points and 8 rebounds per night. And by the time he finished his junior season, he was already one of the favorites to be picked in the top spots of the 1982 NBA draft. That said, he didn't help Georgia achieve anything significant as a team. His decision to go there allowed him to shine on a team that had no real options. However, in an almost unprecedented move, he proved that the same would not happen in the NBA. Let me explain. People like to talk about player empowerment and how situations like Ben Simmons with the Sixers would never have happened in the old days. But check this out. Dominique Wilkins was selected 3rd overall, behind James Worthy and Terry Cummings in the 1982 NBA draft.
I did not want to go to Utah at that time when I got picked. I wanted to stay in Atlanta. Living in Atlanta, going to school down the road in Athens, I wanted to play for the Hawks. I had no idea I was going to be playing with them all the years I played. But it took a couple of elements to make that happen. First of all, I used to travel around with Magic Johnson, and we used to take all the top guys in the NBA. We play summer ball all over the country.
It was the Utah Jazz who made the pick. But it turns out that Neek didn't want to play in Utah. Some people say it was because they wanted to force him to play power forward, but maybe he just didn't want to live in Salt Lake City.
Starting at the other forward spot, standing 6'7" from Georgia, number 21, Dominique Wilkins.
Atlanta will try to run at every opportunity. Dominique on the break, gets a shot. What a change.
3rd pick goes to Utah. Initially, what were you thinking?
I wasn't going.
Oh, hell no.
No. I'm not going to Utah. Y'all crazy.
Going.
Utah. And then they told me I'd be playing power forward. I was like, y'all talking about at 210, 215? Not me.
The point is, he ended up forcing a trade to the Atlanta Hawks, and it was that city he would call home forever. Dominique had a great rookie season, averaging just over 17 points per night. But that same year, he realized he had a lot to learn, because in his first game against the Boston Celtics, he wanted to poke the bear. Facing the best trash talker in the league, Larry Bird, Neek unleashed his entire arsenal. Not of moves, but of words. And even though Wilkins got a slam dunk in Bird's face in a transition play that went around the nation, Larry scored 39 points that night. "But I got him," Wilkins said, after Larry said to him he was going to drop 40 that night. 2 seasons later, Dominique no longer had to look up to talk to the best players in the league, because in the 3rd season of his career, he rose to stardom. Not only did he average 27.4 points, the 6th highest scoring average of that season, he also beat Michael Jordan in the 2nd dunk contest held since 1978. It's true that until then, the Hawks hadn't been competitive. At best, they were able to reach the first round of the playoffs to be trampled by some of the best teams in the conference, such as the Celtics or the Sixers. But in the 1985 to 1986 season, everything changed. The Hawks transformed into a contender. It wasn't that they had a second star who had raised the level of play, but rather that they were becoming more and more cohesive as a team. And more importantly, Dominique Wilkins was getting better every day.
It puts everything in perspective. It was a sweet win for us. I mean, emotionally, confidence-wise, anytime you come and beat the champions, it's got to be a boost for you.
With a record of 50 wins and 32 losses, Mike Fratello's Hawks finished 2nd in their division. Neek led the league in scoring with over 30 points per game and finished 2nd in the MVP race, behind only Larry Bird. At that point, he seemed to have more potential than Jordan, who had missed virtually the entire season with a foot injury. The Hawks were an up-and-coming team led by one of the best talents in the entire NBA. Unfortunately, however, they were never able to make it past the 2nd round of the playoffs. In 1986, it was the Celtics. In 1987, it was the Pistons, another up-and-coming team that threatened to take the Eastern Conference throne. And in 1988, the Celtics sent the Hawks home again in a series that went to Game 7. Wilkins was a beast. Not only did he use his spectacular athleticism to produce some of the best highlights of the season, but he also led his team night after night after night. He tried to lead them to the promised land, but he wasn't able to. It's true that his supporting cast wasn't the best. The Hawks operated with players like Kevin Willis and Doc Rivers as their second offensive option, but even so, they were able to dominate during the regular season, racking up 50 wins season after season. However, in the playoffs, this ability to win was completely diluted. Is this Wilkins' fault? Not entirely, but partly. The best players of his generation, such as Jordan, Bird, and Magic, were able to involve their teammates. They made them better just by being on the court. Dominique, although he was as good a scorer as they were, was never able to become a playmaker. After their playoff failures, the Hawks were relegated to mediocrity. They began to struggle to stay above 500 each season, and in 1990, they failed to even make the postseason. But the worst news came a season later. After Dominique's umpteenth try carrying the Hawks, finishing 5th in the MVP race, he suffered an Achilles tendon injury. At that time, with the sports medicine available, it was a sentence to retirement. Very few players were able to come back. None were able to come back at their best. But Dominique, man, he was a beast. His case went down in history for his quick and miraculous recovery. 10 months after suffering a potentially career-ending injury, he returned to the court. And when he did, it was as if it had never happened. Wilkins surprised everyone by averaging 30 points, 7 rebounds, and 3 assists in his 71 appearances with the Hawks that next season. Not only that, but he averaged 37 minutes per night. Simply incredible. Inhuman, you could even say. However, despite his miraculous recovery, the years were beginning to take their toll on his legs. And after being eliminated by Michael Jordan's 1993 Chicago Bulls, the team that went on to win the three-peat, the Hawks felt that the Dominique era was over. After a decade of trying, they traded him to the Los Angeles Clippers in exchange for Danny Manning. Wilkins dominated in Los Angeles alongside Ron Harper, but the rest of the team was sorely lacking in talent. The Clippers only won 27 games that regular season, and Dominique decided to go to the Boston Celtics as a free agent in a last-ditch attempt to fight for the ring. But that didn't work out either. The death of Reggie Lewis a few years earlier prevented Boston from having a competitive team. Now a journeyman who had well passed his prime, Dominique Wilkins played 2 more seasons in the NBA. One with the Spurs in Greg Popovich's first season at the helm, in which they won only 20 games, and another playing a minor role with the Orlando Magic, a team that fell in the first round of the playoffs to the Sixers. With no gas left in the tank, Dominique Wilkins, at 39, decided to hang up his boots. No MVPs, no rings, not even a conference final, but a resume that is comparable to very few players. So, how good was Dominique Wilkins actually? Well, he wasn't just a star. He was even a superstar at certain points in his career. He was one of the best players of his generation. He received MVP votes in 7 different seasons, finishing second in one of them. He was selected for the All-Star game 9 times. He was selected for an All-NBA team 7 times. He led the NBA in scoring once. He still ranks 16th in all-time scoring in 2025. Without a doubt, these are the numbers of an all-time great. However, many people wonder if Wilkins was a winning player. Was he capable of elevating a team even without being a playmaker? In the end, the era of superstar playmakers is now. In the past, we saw many scorers lead their teams to championships without being spectacular at initiating offense. But those doubts may make sense. Dominique didn't play worse in the playoffs. In fact, he took on even more of the offensive load. However, one-man offense basketball has never been effective. Wilkins never had a supporting cast like Jordan, Magic, or Bird. He never had a team around him that was capable of covering his weaknesses. He never had a real chance to fight for the ring. But at the same time, he became one of the most influential players of his generation. Dominique was the best dunker since Julius Erving. He was the one who picked up his torch to become a figure who revolutionized the aesthetics of basketball. His signature dunks went down in history as the pinnacle of ferocity on the court. With unreal athleticism that seemed impossible to replicate, he left behind dozens of iconic moments that fans who were lucky enough to witness still remember. In 2021, the NBA answered the question for us. Dominique Wilkins is one of the 75 greatest players in basketball history. One of the 75 greatest players that ever step in the NBA hardwood.